Thank you, Megan, for that wonderful talk and for introducing me. Let me see if I can figure out how to work this. There we go. So I'm Jill McKee. I am a pediatric epileptologist at CHOP, and as Megan mentioned, running our natural history study for Syngap. And I'm gonna, oh, there's some weird formatting going on. Okay, I'm gonna run you through three main objectives today. First, want to review some retrospective data and the first work we did to try to identify longitudinal disease histories in Syngap as a first effort at trying to identify potential outcome measures. Then I'm going to go through our year one data from our ENDD natural history study, now renamed PROMISE, the prospective multidisciplinary multi-site study for Syngap. And then I'm going to go through some brief future directions. Sorry. Okay, I can stand back too. All right. So getting started with some retrospective data, especially in rare disease, when it's hard to conduct natural history studies, hard to get enough patients to come see you to really get a good sense of outcome measures, and that those things all take time. It's really prudent to make use of all the available data that we have. So what we did is we looked at data from three different diverse retrospective sources. The Citizen database, which I think most of you are familiar with already, which is a curated EMR data set. Patients followed at our large medical center at CHOP, and then also through insurance claims data. So starting with seizures, because it's one of the things people think of first, is what are we able to learn about the seizure histories from these retrospective data sources? So here is data from electronic medical records showing the distribution of different seizure types over time. And what you notice is that generalized seizures are very common, including atonic seizures, absence seizures, and myoclonic seizures across the lifespan. We can get even more fine-grained than that and reconstruct seizure frequencies in monthly time bins, which is what I'm showing you on the bottom there. And you notice that Syngap has a very unique seizure trajectory. It tends to have later onset of seizures, and they tend to be more frequent than in other genetic epilepsies. And then the nice thing about electronic medical record data and claims data is you can also pull the medication prescriptions. So here I'm showing you treatment landscapes for both anti-seizure medications and medications targeting behavioral symptoms. And what you notice for epilepsy, there's a very common use of valproate, Lamictal, and clobazam. And then for behavioral medications, there's a wide variety of treatment strategies used, but they often target ADHD, sleep disorders, and then behavioral medications, including antipsychotics. So once you have the seizure frequencies reconstructed and then you have the medication data, you can perform a comparative effectiveness analysis to see which of these seizure medications seem to be the most effective at either reducing seizure frequency, maintaining seizure freedom, or doing either combination of those. And what we found is that valproate or Depakote was very effective, as well as lamotrigine. But as Megan mentioned, seizures aren't everything. Not everyone with Syngap has seizures, and they can be difficult to count. So we want to look at what other features make up like a Syngap signature. So using claims data, we're able to compare information in like 250 individuals with Syngap to over 500,000 other patients with epilepsy, just any other cause of epilepsy that's not Syngap. And what you see is that behavioral features, autism, intellectual disability are much more common in Syngap than in the general broad epilepsy population. And then we can even get more specific and compare to two other similar neurogenetic conditions, Angelman and Rett syndrome, and still that holds true, that you see a much higher rate of behavioral concerns and autism in Syngap compared to these other conditions. So what I was previously showing you was just collapsing across time, but it's also important to see the time course of these symptoms. When do they arise? And when can you first see like a signature of Syngap that's distinct from these other conditions? So here I've highlighted the behavioral abnormalities in autism, diagnoses over time, and you can see that Syngap starts to diverge from these other conditions in about the second year of life. And then we can also use electronic medical record data to get a sense of developmental milestones. So what I'm showing you on the left is just the time the cumulative acquisition of milestones over time. And then on the right, what proportion of individuals actually attained given milestones. And what you notice is that there seems to be significant deficits primarily in expressive, across the board, but most significantly in expressive language. So next, we'll move on to looking at our first results from our prospective study. So here is just a very unreadable giant slide showing our massive protocol. But our goals are to follow at least 100 individuals with Syngap over time, evaluating them every 6 months. We're doing caregiver-reported outcomes. We're doing clinic visits with physical exams, and then standardized developmental scales. And then we're also doing QEEG, quantitative EEG assessments. And our study is now rebranded the Syngap Promise, as I mentioned, the prospective multi-site, multidisciplinary study. So this is just a brief overview of our recruitment and demographics. To date, we've seen, that slide didn't even show. Whoops. We've now seen 90 individuals with Syngap, and we span the age range from 1 year to 68 years. We've had about, I think, 24 people come back for 2 visits, and we've had 3 come back for 3 visits. Our patients are coming to see us from all over the country. We're located in Philly, but Megan's also in Colorado seeing individuals, and then we're going to have a Stanford site as well. And then here's just a brief cartoon showing the variant distribution that we see in our individuals in our study. The vast majority of people with Syngap have what we call protein truncating variants, which is on the top, but we have seen 10 individuals with missense variants as well. And this is reflective of the proportion you see in the literature. So going back to seizures, it looks remarkably similar to the figure I showed you previously from the retrospective data, but this is reconstructed seizure histories in 56 of our natural history study participants. And again, sorry, the x-axis is cut off, but this is the first 5 years of life. And again, what you note is a relatively late onset of seizures with pretty consistently maintained high seizure frequencies. And just for a point of comparison, here's the Syngap, the same information in Syngap compared to those with SCN1A related disorders. And again, you can note the later onset of seizures in Syngap, the persistent high frequency of seizures noted by the red, like many people who have seizures have many per day. And it seems to be relatively stable over time, at least across the population. But again, seizures aren't everything. So moving on to some of our developmental scale data, we're performing the Bailey-4, which is a norm referenced test designed for children up to 42 months of age, but we're performing it out of age range in everybody. And it assesses development in cognition, expressive and receptive language, and fine and gross motor. And here you can see the lowest age equivalence is for expressive language on this test, which is kind of matches our clinical gestalt that individuals with Syngap seem to have the most difficulties with expressive language. But what's really interesting is if we look at these scores over time. So what I'm showing you in these plots is each dot is an assessment for an individual plotted across their age. Blue dots are their baseline assessment. Green is the first follow-up, so the second visit, and red is the third visit for individuals who've had 3 visits, and they're connected by lines. And you can see that we don't see floor or ceiling effects. We seem to get a good spread of data, but there's not a clear developmental trajectory coming out from these subscales, at least. And especially if you look at like the cognitive, there's one marked by an asterisk there, where it like the first assessment is high, then it dips down really low, and then it comes back up again. And when we went back and reviewed the chart of this individual, it seems like that was due to behavior. So we think a lot of this variability is due to just random behavioral differences due to their autism, whether they're happy to see us that day. So these scales don't seem to have the best trajectories over time. But then if you look at the motor scales, we're starting to see a little bit more of an upward trajectory with age. And we don't see as many big dips in individuals across visits. So this is the gross motor and fine motor. And then we're also doing the fine motor subsets of the Peabody, which is another norm reference test for children up to 72 months of age. And for these, we actually starting to see more tight developmental trajectories over time. And then we're also doing the GMFM, which is used to evaluate changes in gross motor function in children with CP. And it's designed for like the skill set of a typically developing 5-year-old. And here we do start to see a really nice progression over time where you see increasing gross motor function as individuals age. And it seems to be pretty tightly clustered. So this is promising. As our retrospective data showed, there's also a high proportion of autism in individuals with SYNGAP. So we're also doing the CARS-2 assessment, which is designed to assess 15 areas of behavior and help identify individuals with autism. And unsurprisingly, the majority of the individuals we've seen have at least mild to moderate symptoms of autism, with only 6 with minimal to no symptoms. And then lastly, I mentioned the EEG. So when you come see us in clinic, we do a little net cap-based EEG setup to try to capture some just baseline resting EEG. And then we're performing quantitative analysis on that. And this work's been done by Peter Gaylor, now postdoc in the Helbig lab. And what he's done is he's built models trained on the EEG data to try to predict genetic diagnoses. And that's what you can see in panel A. There is the ROC curve showing the performance of this model. And he's able to predict SYNGAP pretty well based on the baseline resting EEG features. And then in B, what he did here is pull out the specific features that are driving the model, what's making the model work. And what you can see is that the alpha theta ratio in the occipital lobe is the strongest feature. So then we wanted to look at that more, and this is hot off the press data, but across the age span in toddlers, children, and adults, we see that the occipital, so in the back of your head, alpha theta ratio on quantitative EEG analysis is reduced in individuals with SYNGAP. And we've validated this in 2 separate cohorts. So the controls are neurotypically developing children in red are the controls. And then we've also looked at this in clinical EEGs obtained on individuals with SYNGAP in green, and then in our natural history study, quantitative EEGs. So 2 completely different systems, different patients, and this holds true. So this is still very early, but it's promising that this could be a biomarker. So next steps are we need to correlate this with the outcome measures to see if it holds true. If you can find a biomarker that's reflective of developmental outcome, that's really promising that maybe it would potentially respond to therapies as well. So just a couple points on future directions that other things we're planning to do. We'd like to look for molecular biomarkers as well, see if we can determine if the protein levels of the SYNGAP protein levels in the CSF correlate with functional outcomes as well, because that could be a potentially useful biomarker. And then we're also starting a collaboration with Maya Buchan at Penn to look at sleep, because as all of you know, sleep can be very disrupted in SYNGAP. So we're planning to send our natural history study participants home with an actimetry watch that they can wear for 2 weeks and just track their sleep to look at sleep-wake cycles and see if we can see a SYNGAP signature there. And then just a couple of things about our protocol development. We are now currently in the process of submitting a new IRB to have a separate SYNGAP study protocol, because it was previously embedded in a larger natural history study. We're going multi-site as well, which has already started with Megan Abbott seeing individuals at Colorado, and then we're hoping to expand to Stanford as well. We're moving towards GCP compliance and then alignment with FDA regulations as well, because the ultimate goal is we would love to be able to use this data as a control arm in a future clinical trial. So in summary, reviewed some of our retrospective data, showed you some first pass look at our prospective data from our natural history study, and then reviewed some of our future directions as well.